outside part of the program first.
Well, good afternoon, everyone here in person, and those of you online. Andrew Kircher here from Port Huron Museums. So I'm our community engagement manager. So I do our kind of social media and outreach, that sort of thing. I know many of you know me, but I'm really excited. If you guys have never met Jeff Pavlik, he is a historian extraordinaire. We did this actually last year for the very first time in our midst of our pandemic. So we figured we'd do things again. It was not this cold last year. I don't think it was this cold, but we're back with some maple sugaring. I know he has so many interesting things to impart on you guys. And as I mentioned, we're not going to spend the whole time outside. We are going to get to move inside where it'll be a little bit warm, but I'm going to turn things over if you want to take it from there.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for being here. Like Andrew said, we are going to do a kind of a hybrid again. Last year we did a hybrid program. This year is going to new type of hybrid program. Last year we were battling coronavirus. This year we're battling Arctic blast. So we now have the experience of Arctic blast. And yeah, it's actually warmed up right now, isn't it? Like it was probably 15 degrees colder like 5 minutes ago. So let's focus on what we can out here. Then let's go inside, and then we'll just kind of continue. So it's going to be a tad disjointed, you know, but it'll all work out. My name is Jeff Pavlik. I am a historian by trade and a independent scholar and writer, primarily focusing on bread history. I'm a baker by trade as well. So most of my studies are in 18th century bread manufacture, and that's kind of what I really like to do. But as a side focus, I fell in love years ago with maple sugaring. This is kind of the new year to me. Like this symbolizes kind of the beginning of the year. I know that we say it's in January, but to me this is the time of year when it's like the world starts over again. The earth is coming back alive. The birds are coming back into down into where they want to live for the rest of the spring and summer and fall. And the humans, we move around too. We're back outside. We're seeing each other for the first time. I know I have neighbors that I haven't seen in months. You know, that's just how the world is in Michigan, in the Great Lakes in the winter. So now comes the spring. And just like we celebrate this season, the people that colonized North America, the French and the British, they had learned to celebrate this season as well from the natives. So the process that I'm going to show you right now is a native process. It's something that is indigenous knowledge. It's something that we're fortunate enough to learn because we've A, paid attention, B, asked questions, and C, people are nice enough to impart knowledge upon us. Everything I'm going to show you was known for thousands of years. We're going to talk about the biology and physiology of how a maple tree works, you know, how it works, because we're smart, we're science. We understand things. We have measurements. No scientist at the University of Michigan that will tell you they understand how this works. That the maple tree is still a mystery. So I can impart stories on you that the natives tell each other, but that's really for them to tell you, not me. And you might even come off, and when I tell you, it might kind of sound like folklore or something that was like in the past. You know, and we tend to think of these indigenous stories as being from a long time ago. And they're kind of like, you know, mysterious. The science that I'm going to tell you is just as mysterious, and it's it's modern, it makes no more sense than what anyone else is going to tell you. So we just have to kind of let ourselves be in a space to understand that, like, no one has full information on this process, and we're all in the learning process, and we know it works, and we've known it's worked for thousands of years. What we're after is sugar. We love sugar. Human beings love sugar. Who here likes sugar? Oh, everyone here likes sugar. So what is this here? Does anyone know? What do you think this is?
Maple syrup. Maple syrup.
Syrup. Syrup. Okay. So this syrup came from sap. The sap came from the maple tree. The sap looks like this. What does this look like? What would you think this was if I handed it to you? Would you think it's water? Because it is. But maple syrup comes from maple sap, and maple sap has sugar in it. So the amount of sugar in this gallon of sap, if this was sap, it would have sugar in it. If it had sugar, it would have about 1/3 of a cup, right? That's 1/3 of a cup of sugar. So it has in that sap that comes out of this maple tree, that much sugar per gallon. That's a lot of sugar. Yeah, but it takes a while to get to it. So let's talk about how we're going to get to that sugar. That's what our goal is. Our goal is to get to that sugar. So we get all that maple sap. It takes about 40 gallons. So if that's a gallon of sap, it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. This is a quart of syrup. Anyone really good at math want to figure out how many gallons of sap did it take to make 1 quart of syrup? A quart is 1/4 of a gallon. Anyone? Anyone? Divide 4 by 40. What do you get? Who knows how to divide 4 by 40? How about 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10? Is how much? 4 times 10, 40. Right? So that's what it is. So a quart is 10 gallons of sap. This is math. Math is fun. Remember that. Okay? So yeah, so if we had 10 of these and we boiled it all the way down, we're left with that much syrup. Okay? That's how much sugar. 10 of these will equal 1 of these. We're after the sugar. So what we're going to do is we're going to pump this fire up and we're going to get this syrup to start boiling. It's really nice out here.
It is. Yeah, it just happens like that. I like it.
So you know what? We're going to play with it. We're going to stay out here as long as we can. Because it's really nice. Good for us. Let me move some of this fire around. I'm just kind of pushing the fire right underneath where we want it. Okay, so we have in here that sap, or that syrup, and we're going to boil that syrup. Syrup, by definition, is 2/3 water. I mean, sorry, 2/3 sugar, 1/3 water. So it's 66% sugar. So in order to make maple syrup, you have to make a solution that is 66% sugar. Now, if we want to play scientists, we can use a thermometer. And if we measure when we boil that sap down and it starts looking like syrup, if we put a thermometer in it and measure it, when it's 7 degrees above boiling point, which is like 219 degrees-ish here in Michigan, that means it's syrup. It's just done. Like it's just that simple. Like that's all you have to do is boil it until you hit 7 degrees above boiling point. Okay, that's simple enough. At that point, you'll have 2/3 of it will be sugar and 1/3 will be water. Our goal in historic sugaring is to drive the rest of that water out. Now this all makes a lot of mathematical sense. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about math because you guys love math. I can see it. So we know that a gallon of syrup is 11 pounds, right? We're going to drive 1/3 of the water off of that, and we're going to be left with 8 pounds of sugar. So the math all makes sense, right? That what we're looking for is 100% sugar, which means that we have to drive 98% of the water off. That sap coming out of that tree is 98% water. We're only after that 2% sugar. So that 1/3 of a cup I showed you out of that gallon, that's all we're after. And the way we're going to get it is just boiling it, boiling it, boiling it. That boiling process has not changed in thousands of years. We have added a few technological innovations to the process of maple syruping, which is what we mainly talk about now, maple syruping. But for the most part, it's relatively the same process of just extracting as much water as possible. The thing they've added is they added a reverse osmosis machine to the process where you run the sap through this microfilter, and you're basically only allowing like you're allowing larger particles like sugar to be held back in solution, and you're letting a lot of the water go through. So you're condensing it before you start boiling it. But that's not it. That's about as far as we've gotten in the last several thousand years in this process of just boiling off the water. That's what we need to do. Now, this sugar here, if we had a candy thermometer, we would be watching the temperature steps. We'd be saying, okay, once it's 7 degrees above boiling, we're at syrup. Then we're going to raise it. Say we want to make those soft, yummy maple candies. we might raise it like 30 degrees, and then we would let it cool, then we would paddle it, we would elongate those sugar molecules and make them kind of crunchy and make them kind of like mushy, and then we could pour it into molds and make those soft maple candies. If we wanted to, what we want to do is continue to run about 40 degrees above the boiling point, at which time we'll push most of the moisture off, we'll let it set, and then we'll start paddling it, and we'll paddle the rest of the moisture off, and then we'll have dry sugar. Or we could pour it into molds and let the molds harden and have hard sugar but in molds. So these are all just basically candy making, and this has been historically the way we've been doing it for centuries. You know, we know that these candy molds were been used by the natives and by the colonists to store their sugar, and we also, of course, know that we have just granulated sugar. Ooh, you've got a nice ball there. Good job, graceful. Okay. So, that was great. What we just had was our first boil. Now, in this process of making maple sugar, it's important that we think about it not boiling over, right? One thing that you can do is, I split my stuff between, most of my stuff's in there. So usually I have a piece of bear fat, and you can take bear fat and rub it over the top here, and that will actually help when it starts foaming like that, it hits the grease and then breaks and falls back into itself. In the larger pot, we see images and hear tales of the natives using these huge kettles, 20-gallon kettles. They would oftentimes employ the older women to sit by the fire, and their jobs were to fan the fires and to take like a piece of pine needles, really spruce, that have those sharp pines on, little things on them, and they would poke it. So as this stuff would rise up, they could just poke off those bubbles and push them down. It also allowed for the older people of the community to sit around the fire. So they were still being used and feeling useful, but they were sitting around the fire, keeping warm. This time of year for maple sugaring was an incredible amount of activity, because you had to not only collect all this sap, you also had to collect all this firewood. The amount of firewood being used was tremendous.
I see it.
So we know that natives, when they were making this syrup in the beginning, they weren't using these metal jars. They were using various methods, and we'll show them inside in order to push off the rest of that water. You have a nice hot fire here.
Get a good action shot of boiling.
I got this fire going, but now I kind of want to take it down a notch. This is too good of a fire. Yeah, so what we're basically doing is just pushing all that water off. Now, when this all boils all the way down and it starts to turn into sugar, where do you think I want to put it? Like I want to stir it into making sugar. Where would you put it if you had to stir it into making sugar? Do you see anything around here like that you use to stir with, or that you'd put this hot sugar into?
Where would you put it?
Anything around here that you might want to put it into? No?
No, nothing. Nothing.
No. I'm going to put it in this wooden trough here.
I would. That's where I would put it.
That's where I was going to put
Probably beat your hands.
Because what's going to happen is that this super hot liquid, once it hits this wood, the wood's going to just cool it down really quickly. It's going to soak in a lot of that heat, and that's going to help regulate the pushing off of the rest of that water. It also, the wood soaks up some of that water. So I've seen troughs that are 3 or 4 or 5 times this size, big enough so that you almost have like small canoe paddles. You might have 2, 3 people on either side paddling gallons and gallons of sugar. So this is going to be 1 quart, so we should get about 2 pounds of sugar in this, is what we're going to try to get out of that quart. So the reason we're looking at sugar and not syrup, right? I mean, because obviously we could be talking about syruping, right? Because that's what most people talk about is maple syrup. The problem with maple syrup is there's a couple problems with maple syrup. Number 1 problem with maple syrup, as everyone will attest to, is messy. It's just a weird, messy, sloppy substance, you know? It tastes delicious, but it gets everywhere, right? You know? So if you're living in a time before glass containers and screw-top jars, you only have so many options as to where to keep your syrup. You know, like syrup is just one of those messy things. So it's hard to contain and hard to hold on to. Secondly, syrup by nature will spoil. You know, if you have real maple syrup from a manufacturer or you make it yourself in your backyard, you know that maple syrup, once it's done, still needs to be refrigerated. You have to refrigerate maple syrup. It has enough water in it for it to mold. We don't want it to mold, you know. So if we keep it refrigerated, it won't mold. But that means that it would have molded 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago as well. So they would have eaten maple syrup. You know, both the natives and the colonists definitely ate maple syrup. They just didn't carry it in their pantry. You know, we have one really good example of how this worked. In 1763, a man by named Alexander Henry had come to Michilimackinac. Does everyone know where Michilimackinac is? If you hold up your, like, what does this look like? What state does this look like? Michigan. Okay. Do you know where you know where the bridge is? The bridge is at the very top, right? Right. So at that place where we have the bridge now, there was an old fort, and there still is a fort. It's not like guarding anything anymore, but it's there. Were you at Michilimackinac?
Yeah, we went there not long ago.
Excellent. I spent a lot of time up there. Andrew spent a good quarter of his life there, I think, working. And yeah, we are big fans of that fort. Well, there's a fellow that came there. That fort was there since 1714, but by 1763, so 50 years later, the English had won a war, and the English moved into the Great Lakes. The French were no longer in charge of the fort. They were now living there, but they weren't the ones whose military was in control of the fort. It was now a British military fort. Along with those British military were British traders. And so one of the first traders to come into Michigan was by this name Alexander Henry. He met a native family. They got along quite well. Probably Chippewa, we believe, is what I've read mostly. But one of the peoples of the Straits. And they got along fine. They said, "Hey, why don't you come with us next winter? We're going to go up into the UP, somewhere across the Straits, and we're going to set up our sugar camp in March." So in March they would head out, still frozen, still snowy, still icy, and they would set up their sugar camp. The sugar camp consisted of a longhouse that they would all live in. There was 8 of them, this family of 7 plus Alexander Henry, and they spent their days and nights sugaring. They were there for about 1 month. In his journal, he writes this. He was a trader, so he had scales, because everything that you trade it with, you want it to weigh. If you're trading corn for as food for supplies, or if you're trading beaver skin, whatever you were trading, you wanted to weigh how much they weighed, because you eventually had to put it in a bale or a pack and put it in a canoe, and it had to be shipped somewhere else. So no one wanted to have things too heavy. So scales are just common, right? So let's assume that his numbers were right. He says that the 8 of them, after that month of sugaring, had collected 1,600 pounds of sugar. Plus, they had eaten 300 pounds over the course of that month. He says that they lived off of sugar and almost nothing else for that entire month. So that's another 300 pounds. So that's 1,900 pounds of sugar. That's almost a ton of sugar, right? A ton is 2,000 pounds. So 1,900 pounds of sugar. And at the end, they took 36 gallons of syrup they had left. More than likely, that 36 gallons of syrup means that there's like 8 pounds per gallon. So they still had, another 300 something pounds, of sugar still available to them. So they made over a ton of sugar. But at the very end of the season, when you're getting the last of the sap out of your trees, it tends not to turn to sugar very well. It tends to be more difficult to turn. So it's just easier to keep it in syrup. So I think that they probably had he said that they had a 10 large kettles that were between 12 and 20 gallons each. So that's a big kettle. A 20-gallon kettle is huge. So I think they probably took some of that syrup and just kept it in the kettles, and they just, kind of as they ended up, they probably kept it in these copper and brass containers, not trying to put it into some kind of other, whatever they were using, they were just going to eat it up quickly, and they'd eat up that syrup. So people liked syrup, they did, but they just didn't carry it around with them for very long, because someone's going to spill it. Someone's going to spill it. But if we turn it into sugar, just pure sugar, it's never going to go bad. In Egypt, they dig up those pharaohs' tombs and they find honey in there. Honey that you could eat today. Why? Because it's sugar. It doesn't go bad. Sugar just doesn't spoil. There's nothing to spoil when it comes to sugar. So this idea of taking this product all the way down to pure sugar means that you are, this is actually sugar probably from last year. Sorry. Whoops. It's not bad, it's just it had like a piece of grass on it, which is bad.
There's definitely sugar from last year in my office.
Oh, no. So we are getting to this point where we're still frothing. It's regulating itself into these big bubbles, and we're gonna watch it. Oh, look at it drip off. So we don't have a thermometer here, right? So we're just gonna have to watch it. We're gonna have to learn some intuition. We're gonna have to, so then things that like people have learned over time. First of all, we know if we stir it and it falls, we can kind of see how much actual liquid is left in here. So, you can see that it's not that, it's really quite boiled down. Then we can lift up the stick and watch it. How long does it take for it to turn into just sugar? It's starting to get, see right there, it's finally starting to turn into sugar. Right there, it's just sugar. But we want it to turn quicker. We want it to drop down and then come back up. So it's still a little bit runny, so we still have a little bit of time. But we're going to make it into sugar, because once it's made into sugar, it doesn't go bad, like I said. And it becomes an item that you can store. It's an item that you can eat any time of year. It's your primary seasoning, a primary seasoning. I mean, sugar tastes great on everything. So why not add a little bit of sugar to what you're eating? But we eat a lot of sugar. Like nowadays, we can eat anywhere between 100 and 150 pounds of sugar each of us. Each of us. We love sugar. It's crazy. 100 years ago, at the turn of the century, you might have been lucky to have half of that amount of sugar. 100 years before that, you would have had only a small fraction of sugar. If in this time period, in the 1760s, when Alexander Henry's out there bringing a ton of sugar back into Michilimackinac, he would have been lucky to have a few pounds of sugar in his entire year. It's such a luxury item to have sugar. And when they had sugar, it was primarily going to be cane sugar. It was going to be cane sugar from the slave islands in the Caribbean or the slave land of Brazil. I mean, these are places where they were growing sugar and they were importing it into North America. But it was incredibly expensive and made by slaves. We'll talk about this all inside. But know that for them to make this sugar was really just, talk about an amazing thing to have happen. Imagine writing back to your mom, "Dear Mom, I just made sugar." Like I was just hanging out in the woods, and like these people that have been here for thousands of years show me that we can tap this one kind of tree, get the sap out of the tree, it flows freely, we boil it down, and next thing you know, I have 2,000 pounds of sugar sitting in front of me. It's really quite, it's quite a an amazing thing. It's just truly amazing watching this happen, because we know that this is just coming from this tree, you know. So one singular tree, the question was how long did it take to get a gallon? It just really depends, but a singular tree needs to be at least 10 inches in diameter to tap it. So once we tap a tree, you know, big enough, we can tap that tree and we'll get about 10 gallons of sap per tree. That's just an average. Some trees are going to give you more sap, some are going to give you less. So in this example of Alexander Henry, we know that if they collected 2,000 pounds of sugar, right, and at each, you know, we can start doing the math backwards and realize that they tapped over 1,000 trees. You know, that they had to have tapped over 1,000 trees to get that much sugar.
What they used to tap them?
We're gonna look at all that stuff inside. Yeah, I have all the things to show. Yeah, it was like when we set up here like 20 minutes ago. It was you know. All right, let's watch. See, it's falling. Oh yeah, we're losing it now. Okay, so this looks beautiful. Let me just watch it one more time. Let's just make sure that we are.
It's happening.
It's happening.
It's happening.
I'm gonna just let up a little bit more of this water.
He wants to know when season is. Why do you do it when it's cold?
Okay, that's awesome. That's a great question. Okay, so that tree over there, that maple tree, what is different about that tree right now than this summer? How is that tree different now than it will be in the fall?
Right there.
No weeds. Okay, so what do weeds do on a tree? Do you know? Like, do weeds have
there
any
leaves
purpose
on it?
other than looking really pretty? No? So weeds are like little solar panels. You've seen solar panels on houses, right? They suck up the sun and they turn it into energy. So in the case of a tree, those leaves are sucking up all that sunlight and turning it into sugar. Basically, they're living off of sugar. All right, so I think we are perfect.
Can you believe it?
Rich, come here. Rich,
Look at this.
Rich,
Happening.
come look. Come look.
Oh my.
Turned that glass container, remember? It stirred and now it got really hot and felt frothy and bubbly.
Yeah, it really, you can see how aerated it is.
Yeah.
And you can probably smell it, because it smells amazing from where I'm at. You guys aren't that far away.
Yeah. It smells so good.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spoon, start moving it back and forth, and watch the magic happen. So we took what basically was water out of that tree behind us, turned it into syrup, and then took that syrup and we're just going to turn it into sugar.
Look at all that sugar. That's bad.
Look at that.
Candy sugar.
It is! And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, you just made candy?
That's what he was doing the whole time.
It didn't seem that interesting, but now I'm going to pay attention. There it is. Look at that. Sugar.
They're alive.
People for who knows how long have been making this, you know? And we have to respect that we don't know how long. And we also have to respect the idea that, like, right now, you can buy this at Trader Joe's or Costco for $14 a pound or $15 a pound at least. Yeah, I mean, it could be more. I don't know what it is this year. I mean, it goes up and down. And we love, you know, this kind of thing. Like, we all can have some. And when we buy it, we want to buy it by the pound, maybe a half a pound at a time. And I think it's just really important to step back, and we're going to look at the process of how this is both continued and changed. But this might be as much sugar as a human being gets, like, in a whole year, or maybe even a lifetime. You know, like, we are so fortunate, and we live in this time of just continue more is better, that, like, we just made this, let's make more. Like, let's just keep going, right? Like, I'm ready to do this all day now. Maybe people were just happy with a little bit of sugar they made, because they didn't have all the same tools that we're using now. They don't seem to have an economy based on it. Like, this will become, we'll talk about, this became part of an economy, a scale. By the 1830s, that guy up there, the Alexander Henry, talked about shipping out his, you know, having 2,000 pounds of sugar that they made. That one little family of 8. Within 100 years, by the 1830s, 1840s, they're shipping out 1 million pounds of sugar from the UP down to Detroit. 1 million pounds of this. It goes from what might have been prior to colonization, something that people made a pound of, or maybe 10 pounds, or maybe 100 pounds, maybe a 2,000 pounds, we don't know. But it doesn't seem like they were making that much. But they definitely knew what they were doing. To a thing that we were commodifying, we were capitalizing, we were exploiting this like ability to make more and more and more, and we were sending out 1 million pounds of this within a few short years. So we're going to go inside the museum and talk about how that transition happened and the tools that it took, kind of the tools the natives used, the tools the French had brought and the English had brought, how that kind of kept it the same and how it made it different, you know? In the end, we're still after this right here. Now, I can't let you eat any of this because I have a license, a food license, and that would just be really bad for me to do. But I have made at my bakery, I made little shortbreads made with maple sugar that are inside. You all get one when we go inside. So if we go inside and sit down and we do it like, you know, when you guys walk in class, do you guys have to say something before you start walking? Like you have to stand in a straight line and one at a time in a line? Yeah, well, we'll do that as best we can.
You probably don't do that.
And then we'll get a little treat, and then we'll sit down, and then we'll look at all the tools that I brought. Yeah, and now it's beautiful in here.
You know it.
All right.
Well, I mean, it's better than it was. All right,
Solid. So we're going to go inside, but hopefully you got to see that magic. Just another one of the programs that we do here at Port Huron Museums. So for those of you who watch the whole thing or are watching it in the future, glad you were able to join us. So again, that was Jeff Pavlik of Sunflower Bakehouse down in Farmington. And we're so glad and lucky he was able to come up here and put on this kind of program. So from Andrew Kircher here at Port Huron Museums, thanks for enjoying the history here in your own backyard.